I would really urgently point to the fact that, there needs to be a reflection of why the West deteriorated to the point we are at today. And I also agree with Ole Döring that, the situation in Germany and Europe is not very far behind. Um, I want to point to the fact that my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, has written a lot of articles. Jacques was mentioning one of them. I mentioned another one yesterday, where he already in the 60s uniquely recognized the paradigm shift which was going on then, where the optimism of the Kennedy period. And when Kennedy's death was 50 years, we had this beautiful Requiem concert in Boston in the cathedral, and we played a couple of the speech excerpts from Kennedy, and people can go to the website and listen to that. It's like a different universe. I mean, Kennedy said things like, there is no limit to the perfectionability of human beings, and many more things like that, about the development of the developing countries, and just a totally different paradigm. And when he was killed and then the murder was covered up, that was the beginning of the paradigm shift. And then you had the sex, drug, rock counterculture, which my husband uniquely recognized as that which would, in the medium term, destroy the cognitive potential of the population. And he warned again and again to reverse it. So I would encourage people to study how came that Lyndon LaRouche was able to identify that with an absolute scientific precision. And what we see today in terms of all the elements which Professor Wahab correctly describes, is the end result of a degeneration process of the neoliberal uh, paradigm, which, has taken the form everything is allowed, everything goes. And this is one of the reasons why the West was absolutely incapable of dealing with the COVID pandemic. I mean, in Germany, you have right now a complete explosion of the fourth wave. You have in some European countries indication, numbers going through this 1,000 mark, which is really alarming. The United States also has not been able, despite the vaccines, to really get it under control. And this is because people do put this extreme, exaggerated individualism above the common good. And, once people believe that they have the right to do everything and they have no obligation to make the community, the country, the nation work, then they don't take any advice, not from doctors, nor anybody else. And, these are all symptoms of the same, the collapse in education, the brutality in the entertainment media, the lack of civility which a lot of people have observed. That is all the end result of that paradigm shift of neoliberal values, the rock, drugs, sex, counterculture, and all its aspects of it. And unless, and my husband said many, many times, he said, unless we correct that and replace that paradigm with a true renaissance of classical culture, which puts an image of man again up front, where, as Beltran was saying, uh, uh, that every human being is in the image of the creator. And you don't have to look at that religiously if you don't want, but that there is such a deeper ontological connection between the image of man and the conception of the universe. Hinduism, for example, is absolutely clear that there is a cosmic order which affects the way people behave. And, Nicholas of Cusa basically talks about the microcosm and the macrocosm being governed by the same lawfulness. And you find the same idea in almost every culture, that there is such a connection between the image of man and the identity of man, and the way how he relates to the physical universe at large. And I think we have to have a return to these metaphysical, ontological groundings of the image of man, and basically go back to the idea of natural law, go back to the idea of humanism, go back to the idea of the beauty in culture as that which makes culture. Schiller said, a piece of art which is not beautiful is not a piece of art. So there are many aspects about this whole question, but I think we need a classical renaissance, because if people again would have the idea that their aim is to self-perfect themselves in their life so that they can be of a better service to the country as a whole or humanity as a whole, then this would stop. This is what the Chinese are doing. They try to make things better because they think that that's right. In the West, nobody tries to make things better. People want to have more money. They want to have more this. We need this paradigm shift. And I think since we also are in the emergency, we discussed about Afghanistan. I mean, I think that is in Haiti. I could say Yemen and but I want to say Afghanistan and Haiti are the two places where that paradigm shift must become a deed and not just a word.
My name is Denise Rainey. I am a retired educator in upstate New York. I was a classroom teacher for 20 years and a school administrator for 20 years in an urban district. And prior to retiring, I had the good fortune to be chosen by an organization called the China Exchange Initiative. While there, we met with local ministers of education to discuss comparisons between Chinese education, or what we observe, and the American system. Chinese educators were most interested in talking to us about how to increase the teaching, so to speak, of creativity, and in comparing what our suggestions would be for their systems. So the elementary days that I spent most time with typically ran from like 8 a.m. to 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, with a 1.5 to 2 hour break in the afternoon when children left the school, went home, had a meal, maybe did some chores, maybe did some practice with their families, and came back for a round two, so to speak. So it was a very long day. When children were observed by their teachers to be struggling with something that was taught in the morning session, it was common. I saw several times where the teacher would wait to meet the parent or grandparent who came to pick the child up, and then say to them, your child or your grandchild is struggling with this morning's content. And then instead of leaving for the 1.5 to 2 hour break, the parent or grandparent would go into the school with the child, and the teacher would do some reteaching immediately there with the family. And then the family would be expected to go home and through the evening and rest of the week work on the skill or the piece of academia that the student was struggling with at home. We kind of explored that, how does this level of pride and ownership come about? And one of the things we learned, among many, was that in China, students clean the schools. Students in the building are divided into teams, and each team takes their week on rotation to clean the school. And they take that very seriously. There were large rooms where other classes and subject areas were taught, and they ranged from traditional Chinese subjects such as calligraphy and traditional musical instruments to contemporary musical instruments. We saw violin instruction, piano instruction, the Chinese zither, and several other Chinese traditional instruments being taught in music class. Much of what we consider here to be extracurricular was part of the basic curriculum there. Every English-speaking adult that I could speak with and ask, you know, children here just seem so positive and so enthusiastic about what they're doing. And the response I would get was, we're a developing economy, and the Chinese have a very strong sense of optimism and excitement for their future. Students are going in every day feeling like they have a purpose, and they know that they're being educated to serve their nation in the future. So unlike here, where we might say to a 6 or 7-year-old, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, you know, and she might say a ballerina, or he might say a football player. Answers there would be more practically tied to the needs of the country. Well, we're building cities and our country needs scientists, so I'm going to be a scientist, or I'm going to be an engineer and I'm going to work on, you know, on big buildings, or I'm going to work on helping our medical system become better. When you went into the high schools, there was a very clear sense of purpose among high school students around what they were learning, and the fact that they knew they were going to be applying this when they finally got out to the work world. And so during the John Kennedy era, there was a huge push for American schools to catch up with advancements in science and mathematics. And NASA kind of drove the American curriculum during that period. Right now, I don't see anything driving that sense for American students of, we have something to accomplish, we have something to achieve, we need to become more competitive. I think, unfortunately, the American media too often says, oh, well, we're the strongest economy in the world. We have the best educational system in the world. We have the best university systems in the world. People who know that that is no longer true. None of those statements are accurate. And what's sad is that American students and the American school systems in general don't have a sense of what we're striving for to achieve as a nation.
We hold a competition last year for kids aged from 6 to 10 to design a future school. And we have a very strong jury members from Tsinghua, Tongji, and CAFA, and also from various education institute. So this is our final. We have 36 kids out of hundreds of kids, you know, who win their honor as candidate for the final prize. You know, those are all very young and little kids, and they're daring to speak about their ideas in front of hundreds of audience. And also some kids decide to put their school under the sea. They're starting to looking into methods how to transfer human, you know, down underneath like 500 meters below the sea. And they're starting to find their way for all those mechanisms. They're not only showing a really beautiful and rich color layers for the land, the grassland, As well, they're using some traditional tent architecture from Inner Mongolia and to put it into this stand and to make it really surrounded by the natural environment. A lot of this young kids, they have amazing skill of making drawings and with colors. For example, this one, she's really good at freehand drawing. She starts with single point and single line. She's very easy to draw all over the place on this drawing. Some of these boys, they're more good at handmade model. The one on the left, he's making this amazing white structure, which is very abstract, referred to, the white models for professional architects. But they made a very complex layers of space, and they're trying to creating the structure to make it reasonable and exploring, how people or users moving through into the space, which is amazing. And on the right-hand side, they already understand to superimpose the traditional Chinese architecture in the nature, in the water and mountain, to be contrast with the super high rise of the CBD of Beijing, which is an amazing idea. So I feel, in the future, the aesthetic design, aesthetic education, or the art education shouldn't be limited into creating pretty drawings and paintings only. That should be a fundamental ability for kids. But how to utilize all this ability into solving real problem, and also to creating something more complex for kids to willing to explore the world by themselves and finding all the answers with their own hands and eyes. That is our point.
Squid Game and other things to come. Ideas are what is required as a source for the increase of man's power over nature to generate an economic platform to increase our potential relative population density. Forming ideas based on principles and concentration of our creative capacities on such principles is what nourishes our power to discover. This is what defines our capacity to create a future, the capacity to survive as a species. If you destroy such power to generate ideas, you therefore destroy the future. It is precisely what's happening here and now, under permanent lightnings of raw, bestial emotions thrown through the screens of our digital equipments. Our adolescents and children are immersed in a universe combining hyper-violent video games, trash and gore, pornography, and TV series, particularly those of Netflix, conveying a world of virtual fantasies which destroys the concentration of our creative capacities. The flow of images targets the non-cognitive modes of fantasy life imagery, associating erotic compulsions to bestial violence. If we let this assault continue, the result will be no future. This is not just tricks of a counterculture controlled by commercial forces. It is a geopolitical intention to infantilize and bestialize through the hacking of our minds. It is a conscious policy of the Anglo-American oligarchy to transform citizens into subjects, sickening with an indifferent depravity to real crimes, and prone to willful submission to ruling powers, a transformation into impotent voyeurs of various games of thrones. Some of you may consider what I'm saying as a conspiratorial view. I'm going to start by showing you some relevant images and then going into the gist of a crucial paper written by LaRouche on December 1997, The Wells of Doom, urging us not to cling to the sinking ship of evil, of an evil open conspiracy set by H.G. Wells himself as the lackey of the British oligarchy.
My presentation is titled, How the World Health Platform Will Save the Future of the West. The crisis in education is not just a crisis in education. What we are witnessing is a total breakdown of society. At least I'll speak for the United States, and I suspect Western Europe as well. What else can we conclude when the head of the World Food Program, David Beasley, says that a mere $7 billion could prevent tens of millions of people from dying of starvation, and no individual, no group of individuals steps forward to do anything about it?
I'm really, really concerned about, the country and my own place in it. It's very difficult to be comfortable, or feel safe or secure or at ease, whether you're watching the news, quote unquote, or taking a walk in the streets. The violence, the racism, the sexism, the classism, some of the inhumanity that I see to human beings. These are deeply troubling me. And also, this country, its ruling elite, could get us into some very big trouble and problems. So I hope that something is done. And maybe we should begin with education. Really, we should make it a top priority as individuals, groups, communities, the nation, and the government. My obsession, though, is really Afghanistan, my country of birth. We all know, and you have observed and pointed out kindly, that this is a country on the brink, and this is man made, and I say man made, by the United States and its partners in crime, and with the collusion of the so called Afghan governments over the last 20 years. As you know, most people are right now hungry, they're sick, they're famished, and they could starve. It's getting very cold, and COVID-19 is very severe. The country is experiencing a drought. There's no money. There's no government. There are no schools. There are no doctors. There's no medicine. There's no heating. There's not even enough drinking water. And as I said, this is man-made. There are powers that deliberately produce this situation, and I think they're morally and ethically responsible to fix the situation as quickly as possible and end my obsession.
Well, I think some of it we discussed in previous conferences, starting with the Schiller conference in July, where we went into the reasons that the Afghanistan war was ill-defined from the very beginning. It was clear to the military of the United States, of the Europeans, that it was completely untenable in 2010. The Afghanistan papers, I'm only references that you came now new into the discussion, but we had a lot of these discussions, and I would urge you to go to the conferences we have on archive on our website, because we are in the middle of trying to solve all of that. And I fully agree that a lot of crimes were committed, and I also think the non-action of the West right now, after they did this to the Afghanistan people for 20 years, leaving the country without an economic anything. They spent 2 trillion, the United States alone, and then the German Bundeswehr another 60 billion or something, but nothing is left 2 weeks after the previous government had left and the US left, it turns out there was zero. Nothing has been invested. So this is a crime. And that I absolutely insist that the West, the United States and European nations and all NATO members who were there have an absolute responsibility to step in. To release the fund is the bare minimum, because this is the money belonging to the Afghan people. And given the fact that, according to Beasley, 95% of the people are in acute danger of dying of hunger and cold. I mean, that is the reality to start with. Now, I mean, you may think about the Taliban, whatever you want to think about, but talking about women's rights and not trying to save the life of 95% of the women, is obviously shows you the hypocrisy of a lot of this discussion. So I just wanted to say that, and I would really encourage you to help us, because we are trying to put together an alliance of people to put, the solutions, the short-term humanitarian aid, but also to integrate Afghanistan into the Belt and Road Initiative projects, which is the only feasible perspective to have a real economic development in the short term.
One of my biggest concerns is that Americans are ignorant, and worse than being ignorant, indifferent to what is going on in other parts of the world, not only educationally, but politically, economically, socially. If you go to Europe, it's very easy to end up in a conversation about politics, and Europeans love to talk politics and are generally better informed than Americans are about what's going on around the world. Before I left for China, people were telling me, oh, well, there's no internet there and they don't have access to the web, and you're going to be cut off for the weeks that you're there. That could not have been more untrue. The administrative team and the leadership team of the principal that I was connected with used to inform me every morning about things that were going on in the United States and in the world, and natural crises or some big crime story or whatever was going on in the United States. I was being better informed about it in China than I probably would have been here. My point being that I worry that Americans need to wake up, so to speak, and become more alert about what is going on in other countries. Americans make the assumption that they know what's going on in the world and that people in other countries do not, and that could not be further from the truth. So, of course, it would start with our educational system, and volumes could be written on what needs to be reformed in American education, but it can't be done in isolation. It has to be done as a piece of overall cultural reform. And I think the first step to Americans being cognizant of that and willing to make the change is that they need to become better informed about what's going on elsewhere in the world, and less focused on the petty shows that they watch on TV and the petty pursuits that occupy their time. This institute, of course, is a great beginning to that end, but so much more needs to be done because the average American is just happily ignorant about what's going on elsewhere in the world.
Thank you. I would say unhappily ignorant, because I think Americans are rather unhappy right now, but they could become happy if they would do something for the good.